I'm going to use this image to demonstrate the use of the detail panel here, which is comprised of sharpening and noise reduction. Before I do that, I'm just going to bring back our navigator panel to show you that I've got either fit or 2 to 1, which is 200 times magnification. Okay, so when you're using the sharpening or noise reduction, you need to be in at least 1 to 1 or 2 times or even 400 times magnification. Okay, so I'll just bring back that. So click in the image, full image, click with zoomed into 200%. And hopefully you can see the effect of the changes I'm about to make. So normally you'd start off with the noise reduction, and it's comprised of luminance, which is the bright speckly noise, and the colour. Now these are the default settings, and if I drag the colour fully to the left, you can see that it brings back the colour mottling, the colour noise within the image. But if I double click it to its default setting, it magically gets rid of it all. So I rarely have need to change any of the colour noise settings. It gets rid of it quite nicely automatically. Luminance noise is a different thing. Now we can see that the detail and the contrast sliders are greyed out until I activate the luminance slider. Now luminance is to do with these brightness mottling effects, and as I drag it to the right, the reason this is so noisy is because it was taken with a Canon 7D Mark I camera at 6400 ISO, so it doesn't handle high ISO settings very well, this fairly old digital camera. So we're having to apply quite a bit of noise reduction to that image. For images taken at 100 ISO, 200 ISO, you'd have to apply very little noise reduction, if any, because you wouldn't be able to see the noise. But because it is such a high ISO setting, you do get this emphasis of noise. So as I drag the luminance slider to the right, you can see that the sharpening effect gets rid of all the noise, but it also makes it into a kind of plastic molding effect. So you need to be very careful how far you drag the luminance, but I'll leave it where it is just so you can see the effect of the detail slider. As I drag the detail slider to the left, you can see the smoothing effect is increased. As I drag it to the right, the kind of smoothing effect is decreased, but you get these horrible artifacts. So I'm just going to double click that back to its default location. The contrast, drag that to the left so it's kind of smooth the image, and drag it to the right, and the contrast brings back some of the information within the image, so that's quite useful. I'm going to put that to about 25, 26 or so, and drag the luminance back. I never set this to more than about 40 because of that plastic effect. So for this I'll probably go to about 35. You're just going to have to live with some of the mottling effects of the remaining noise. Okay, but at least it's a lot better than it was. So 0 luminance, 35 or so. So it's not too bad. Sharpening. In the olden days, a few years ago, the mantra was that you always applied your sharpening to the image as a final stage prior to printing or prior to creating your final digital projected image. Because the idea is that if you apply sharpening, it's going to emphasize contrast anomalies within your image, and any subsequent editing will enhance these problems. But because this is such a powerful and effective tool, the new idea is to apply a little bit of what's called pre-sharpening, a modest amount, at this processing stage, and then apply your final sharpening within Photoshop, or indeed within Lightroom as a final stage. So a little bit of pre-sharpening is useful, and we can apply the same amount for most kind of images. Now these are the default settings for these sliders, and if I, again, we're looking at like 200% magnification. If I drag the amount to the right, that emphasizes the sharpening effect, and all it's doing is increasing contrast between adjacent pixels. And that algorithm, the way it does it, is determined by the radius slider. So at the moment it's got 1, and that's talking about 1 pixel. So each pixel in the image, it's looking 1 pixel radius around each pixel. Every single pixel in the image, Lightroom is calculating the contrast difference between each pixel and its surrounding 1 radius pixel to arrive at this sharpening effect. If I drag it to the right, we can get up to 3 pixel radius, and that increases the effect because each pixel is now looking 3 pixels around each pixel, if you understand what I'm talking about, and it increases the sharpening effect. Normally I would have that around about 1.2. I'll leave it there just so you can see the effect of the detail slider. Drag it to the left, it kind of suppresses these effects. If I drag it to the right, there's no suppression and you get the full sharpening effect. So I'll leave that at its default location. I'll drag the radius slider to about 1.2, typical sort of settings that I use. And the amount, remember this is just pre-sharpening, to about 40 or so, like that. For areas that are a continuous tone, we don't really want sharpening being applied to that because it looks, well, it's emphasizing texture where we don't want texture in that. So this is where the masking slider comes in. And if you press the Alt key whilst you select the masking slider, anything that is white will have the sharpening effect applied. Anything that's black, as you drag the masking slider, will not be affected by the sharpening process. So areas down here where we've got kind of continuous tone, the sharpening effect will not be applied. But areas where we've got lots of detail will appear white and the sharpening effect is applied. So I tend to have it round about 75 to about 90, depending on the type of image that I'm applying it to. So those are the settings that I've determined for this particular image, and again it's 6400 ISO, handheld, and you can see the other settings, 1/13 of a second handheld. So it was a pretty dull image to take a picture of, but because of the way we can sharpen it and especially noise reduce, we've got an acceptable image. Now this is pre-sharpening, so if we were to export this to File, Export, you can tell Lightroom where to send your image to, what type of file, the quality rating, the size. But down here we have output sharpening. So this is the final sharpening if you're doing things in Lightroom. So for screen or matte paper or glossy paper, you have an amount, high, standard, low. So these are the final sharpening parameters. And these are pretty coarse settings really, low, standard or high, which is why I like to do all of my creation of a digital projected image or a print within Photoshop, because you can control this final sharpening a lot better. So I'll cancel that. If we went to print, so we're in Lightroom's print module, we still have the ability down here for print sharpening. Okay, and again we have standard, low or high. So again, these are fairly coarse settings. You can't really control the amount of sharpening that Lightroom is applying all that well. So that is why, or one of the reasons why I like to export this image or send it to Photoshop to carry out further work. So hopefully that's given you an idea as to how to apply sharpening and noise reduction within Lightroom.